Hi, and welcome back. This is Isaac Sturgill again. I'm a housing attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina. This is the second part of a two-part video, the purpose of which is to give tenants information on how to fill out and file a claim against their landlord where the landlord has been failing to make repairs and the tenant believes that they're entitled to some money, some compensation against the landlord because of that. So in the first part of the video, we talked about the actual complaint and the other paperwork, the summons and the fee waiver form that the tenant would fill out and actually file with the court to start the lawsuit. And we talked a little bit about how that's served through the sheriff's department. This part of the video, we're not going to talk about things that the tenant would file with the court, but we're going to talk about a couple of worksheets that would be useful for the tenant to fill out to help them prepare for court and to keep themselves organized. So especially in small claims court, magistrates, the judges, which are called magistrates, really appreciate people who are well organized. And so this is a way to help do that. And so this is worksheet A. And this is giving some information about what tenants need to gather, prepare, and know about repairs. There's some instructions on top that talks about how to fill out the worksheet and what to expect when you get to court with the worksheet. And then down below that, it starts listing some information about the different issues that the tenant's been experiencing at the property. And you really just fill out the ones that apply in the person's, particular situation. So, for example, if the tenant did have a housing code inspection at the property and has a code inspection report, then this instructs them to attach a copy of that report, to keep track of the date the report was issued, the date by which the landlord was supposed to fix the problems, and that would be the date that the code enforcement office gave to the landlord. There's a box to circle to say the landlord either has or has not fixed all the code violations. And then there's a place to say the landlord has not fixed the following conditions, and then you can list the specific conditions that the landlord has not fixed if the landlord hasn't fixed everything yet. Below that, it has some information about the code report itself and what to expect in court. It says that generally it's best to have the person who wrote the report in court to testify, which means if there was a code inspector that came out to the property and did an inspection and the tenant wants to use that code inspection report, the best practice is for the tenant to get that code inspector into court to testify. Now, if the tenant doesn't do that, they may still be able to get the code inspection report in front of the judge, or the judge may let them still give information about it. The rules of evidence, again, are a little bit relaxed in small claims court, but the safest bet is to get the inspector there to testify, because if the inspector's not there and the other side objects, the judge may say, I'm not going to allow this report in because we need the person that wrote it to be here in court, right? And it gives some more information about some exceptions to that. So that's useful information that should be read. And in the event that a tenant does want to get a code inspector in the court, they may need to get a subpoena. That's something they could ask the clerk for help filling out. The clerk would be the one to issue the subpoena. And what a subpoena is basically something else the sheriff would serve, not on your landlord, but on the witness that you want in court. So like the code inspector. And if you're able to get the sheriff to serve a subpoena on the code inspector, then the code inspector would be required to come to court to testify. Okay, next we've got some information that's really digging into the repairs that are needed at the home. And the information we're looking for each of these things is when the problem started, when it was first reported, how it was reported, whether the landlord's done anything to fix it. We want to know if it's still a problem, and if it's still an issue that the tenant's dealing with. And so these pages are designed to help organize that knowledge into notes that would be useful for trial. And I'll give you an example of what this could look like. So we've got, this first one here, the problem. Let's say it's a leaky faucet, right? So you could write leaky faucet. Let's say the problem started on January 1st. You could write that in there. when did the tenant first tell the landlord about the problem? That's really important. Again, remember, because to win these types of claims, the court has to know that the landlord was put on notice of the issue. So if you first reported the problem to the landlord on, let's say, February 1st, 2023, you write that in there. And then you're going to write how you reported the problem. So, how did the tenant let the landlord know that these issues were going on? Was it an email, a text, a phone call, etc.? Again, it's best to have those in writing so that you have proof that you can show the judge. There's a place here to put what repairs the landlord has attempted. If the landlord has attempted any repairs, if there have been no repairs, you could write none. And then that condition, so in this example, we're using a leaky faucet. If it's still a problem, we could put that information there. This condition is still a problem because the faucet continues to leak, for example, and it makes my water bill, $50 a month more than it should be. And then you see it repeat. So the reason why this repeats is because most times when a tenant is dealing with repairs that haven't been made, there's usually more than one issue. So sometimes it's just one problem, like a leaky faucet, but most of the time there's multiple things going on. Like you could have a leaky faucet, but you could also have a cockroach infestation or something like that. And so that's why you see this information repeated over again, is just so you can fill in the answers to these questions for each of the repair issues that the landlord has failed to repair. And that's a really good way to keep organized, because when a tenant goes into court to pursue this claim, and when the actual trial happens, the tenant's going to need to walk through all this information with the judge, talk about every single problem they've been dealing with. They want to, for every single problem, they're going to talk about when it started, when they first reported it, how they reported it, how the landlord has made any repairs, if they have made any, and whether or not the condition's still a problem or how the condition's still affecting them. And so that's important as well. So, I mean, for each of the conditions, you're going to have to go through this same list of questions. So again, that's why you see it repeated, is just to give you a way to organize that. And so that's the first worksheet. One thing that this worksheet does not have on it, that it's also important for the tenant to explain to the court, is how the condition has affected the tenant's life at the property. So in addition to like the dates and the different ways that the tenant has told the landlord about the problem, the tenant's going to want to explain how it's affected them. So like for the leaky faucet, for example, you could say it's, I hear it dripping all the time. It's annoying. It makes my water bill go up. And so my water bill is more expensive. For a cockroach infestation, it may be that it's embarrassing. It makes them feel uncleanly. They have to throw food away because of that. But remember that too, if a tenant goes to court and is pursuing one of these claims, the dates are important. The proof of notice to the landlord is important, but it's also important for the tenant to talk about, again, how those problems affected their life while they were at the home. And then worksheet B, and again, this is not a worksheet that would be filed either. This is just something to help the tenant stay organized. Again, there's the same sort of instructions up there, and it's got some examples in there that you can look at. So I would encourage you to read that. What this is getting towards is if you've had out-of-pocket expenses, and there's a few different types of those. We've talked about those a little bit in the first half of this video. But one of the types of out-of-pocket expenses could be if the tenant has had any property that's been damaged or destroyed because the landlord has failed to make repairs. So for example, that could be something like if there was a leak in the ceiling that the landlord refused to repair, and water leaked through the ceiling and ruined the tenant's sofa, for example. It made it moldy and the tenant had to throw it away. Those are the types of things that this is getting towards. So for each of these, the tenant would list the item. So for that example, let's say the sofa was damaged by, and then you write what the problem was, the water leak coming through the ceiling. And then you're going to give an opinion of what the item was worth. Now with that, it's not the cost to buy a new sofa or to buy a new item to replace the one that was damaged or destroyed. we're really looking at what the item was worth at the time it was damaged or at the time it was destroyed. So for example, you may have bought that sofa for $1,200 initially, right? But maybe it's 5 years old. It's got a couple stains on it. And so maybe your opinion about the actual value is only, $500 or something like that. So be aware of that. It's not asking for the cost to replace the item or to buy a new item. It's asking what you think the item was worth at the time it was damaged or at the time it was destroyed. And so here, for instance, you could put, sofa was damaged by the leak in the ceiling. The item was worth, let's say in that example, it was old, it had some stains on it, but it was still usable and in pretty good condition. I think it was worth $500 in its actual condition before the problem. After the problem, I think it's worth, and then give your opinion of that. So, I mean, if it was completely destroyed, if it's unusable, if you had to throw it away, or the damage was so severe that the item was had to be thrown away, that value may be zero. If it didn't completely destroy the property, but it damaged it, then you would just give your opinion of what you think it's worth after the damage was caused. And then you see the same questions repeated, and again, the reason why these questions are repeated is because if you have multiple items that were damaged or destroyed by the landlord failing to make repairs, this gives you space to list all of those and to answer the same question for each of those. This section is different. This is saying I had to buy the following items because the landlord failed to make repairs within a reasonable amount of time. This is asking about things that maybe the tenant had to pay for to try to fix the problem themselves because the landlord wouldn't fix it, right? So this could be something like, for example, no heat during the wintertime, the landlord won't fix the heater. So the tenant has to buy a space heater for $50, $100, whatever, right? That would be an example. Another example could be, let's say there's a really bad infestation of mice, right? There's mice in the house. The landlord refuses to have an exterminator come out or to fix the problem. So maybe the tenant has to buy some pest control items, like some mouse traps or things of that sort. So any kind of out-of-pocket expenses that are caused by the landlord not making repairs, this is the place where the tenant can list that. So you can list all the items that had to be bought here. You list how much it costs to buy those items. And then you talk about what repairs had to be made by the tenant because the landlord failed to do it. That's, the same thing again. It cost me this much to make these repairs as well. So that's just a place for you to list repairs you had to make or things you had to buy due to the landlord's failure to make repairs and how much it cost. So again, the first thing could be like a space heater or something like that you had to buy because the landlord wasn't fixing the problem. The second one could be maybe something like maybe you had to pay an electrician to come in to do work because the landlord wouldn't do it. So even if it's not an item you had to buy to help fix the problem, maybe it's a service fee or something you had to pay to somebody to help fix it. Sometimes repair issues are so bad that the tenant is forced to actually go to a hotel or to stay somewhere else while they're waiting for the repairs to be made. I think no heat during the wintertime is a classic example of that. I mean, if it's so cold in there that the tenant feels like they're unsafe and they have to get out, or maybe there's some other condition in the property that's dangerous and that could hurt the tenant, so the tenant feels like they have to find somewhere else to stay until the repairs are made, that's a place to list this. So, if maybe you're writing here, if you had to stay in a hotel, I had to stay in a hotel for these days, for this week, or list the amount of days that you had to stay in the hotel, and then you list the cost for how much it costs for that shelter for that time period. The next one talks about, and this is pretty common, utility bills that have increased since a problem occurred. So let's go back to the leaky faucet example. It could be that because of the leak in the faucet, you've noticed your utility bill has gone up $50 a month since the leak started. That's also an out-of-pocket expense that you could ask the court for compensation for against the landlord if the landlord knew about the problem and refused to fix it. So let's use an example. We could say my water utility bill has increased significantly since, and maybe we write in, since the kitchen sink started leaking. The landlord failed to make repairs within a reasonable amount of time. I believe the problem caused this increased utility bill because, and then you put why you think your bill is higher, right? I think most commonly that would be something like, I think it's higher because I noticed when the leak started in January of this year, for example, my water bill in the past had normally been $50 a month, but since the leak started, it's been $100 a month. So that's where you write in why you think the bill is higher. You write in the amount that the increased utility bills have cost. And so that could be $50 a month, for example, in the example we just gave, whatever the overages are, you want to explain that. And then finally, the last space on here is just a place for the tenant to write any other kind of out-of-pocket expenses that they may have had to deal with due to the landlord's failure to make repairs. So if it's anything that wasn't covered by the last few sections, that's a place for the tenant to write in other things and to explain that to the court. So again, both of these worksheets are not intended to be filed, and tenants should not file these with the court. It's not something to go into the court file. These are just worksheets to help the tenant prepare for court and to give the tenant a better success of winning their case. And that's it for the forms. I did want to mention before we wrap this up that, again, the purpose of this video is to show you some forms that would be useful in court where the tenant is filing a claim against the landlord for not making repairs, and then also some worksheets to help the tenant prepare for court. So, you know, it walks through the actual paperwork that you file, and then again, some paperwork that you don't file, but that would be useful for preparing for the case. We did not have a lot of time to get really to do a deep dive into these different claims and to talk about some other tips for success in court. But I did want to mention that on Legal Aid's website, there is a resource. It's called the Eviction Defense Manual. And that book is primarily, the purpose of that book essentially is to help people, if they're being evicted, prepare for court. But there's some sections in there that would be useful for tenants as well. If they are filing their own claim against the landlord, there's a section on there that explains how the claims for repairs work for the landlord failing to make repairs. It gives a bunch of examples of different situations with numbers, and kind of lets you see how those claims can kind of play out. And it also has a section that just has some general tips for success in court that talks about other tips for preparing, like how to conduct yourself during the hearing, how to dress for court, things of that sort as well. So again, we didn't have time to get into those things in this video, but it would encourage tenants, if they're considering filing their own claim against the landlord, to look at the Eviction Defense Manual on our website. We'll put a link to that on this video to show you where to find it, and then to read those sections that apply, because that will also help the tenant get ready for court and make it more likely that they'll succeed. So that does it for this video. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to view this. Feel free to check out our website. I hope this was helpful. Good luck to you and have a great day. Thanks.